Hi, welcome to our channel where we share the most intriguing stories. When Trevor Malone moved into his dream home beyond the grasp of any HOA, he thought he'd found peace. But the quiet masked a brewing war, with drones, forged documents, and a woman named Karen who would stop at nothing to seize control. Welcome to suburban hell. I moved into my house outside High Ridge Commons on a quiet Tuesday morning in early summer, and for the first 2 weeks, I honestly thought I'd beaten the odds. I'd escaped the HOA nightmare stories that kept popping up on Reddit like campfire horror tales. My 4-acre property stretched down the slope like a private green carpet. No matching mailboxes, no beige siding, no committees with clipboards. Just silence, a view of the foothills, and a house with floor-to-ceiling windows that made sunsets look like something screensavers would kill for. I'd come from Seattle, where space was measured in coffee shop power outlets, and owning actual land felt like some ancient feudal privilege I'd accidentally acquired. High Ridge Commons sat a stone's throw away, maybe 50 or 60 yards from my boundary line, but the realtor had been emphatic that my lot was officially, legally, gloriously outside any and all HOA jurisdiction. It was the kind of detail I verified. Myself using public records, zoning maps, satellite data, and every paranoid tool in my cybersecurity arsenal. I wasn't just sure, I was smugly sure. A rare feeling in my line of work, where paranoia is usually the healthier emotion. The first uneasy moment came about a week after I finished unpacking. A woman walking her dog slowed down near my gravel driveway and stared at my solar panels like they were pornography on a church bulletin board. When I raised a hand in greeting, she asked if I'd registered my waste services with the community office. I said I wasn't part of any community office. She blinked twice, nodded in a way people nod when they think you're stupid, and moved on. That kind of thing kept happening. Someone asked whether I'd opted into the streetlight maintenance co-op. Another neighbor wondered if I'd been added to the patrol schedule. Patrol schedule? The only thing patrolling my place was a set of motion sensors and an overworked AI that kept identifying deer as possible hostile objects. But I wrote it off as small-town oddities. Maybe people here just really enjoyed organized living. Then, one crisp morning, I found a sheet of paper folded and tucked through the slats of my wooden fence. Not mailed, not taped, not politely left. Stuffed inside the fence like some passive-aggressive fortune cookie. It read, "You are hereby required by the standards of High Ridge Commons to vacate your domicile on the 23rd from 10 o'clock a.m. to 12 o'clock p.m. for routine structural and infrastructural inspection. Non-compliance constitutes a violation. Signed, High Ridge Commons Infrastructure Cleanliness Committee." There was an official-looking logo at the bottom. Or at least, it would have looked official if someone with basic graphic design skills hadn't clearly given up halfway through the logo's creation. It looked like an eagle made in Microsoft Paint. I stood there for a full minute, rereading the thing, just to be sure it wasn't performance art. Then I went inside, typed up a response, printed it, and marched right back to the fence to leave my own note in the same slot. "You have the wrong property. I am not part of your association. This is private land. Do not approach without a court order." Short, civil, legally airtight. I even resisted the temptation to doodle a better eagle. The next day, around 8 in the evening, my phone rang with an unknown number from the local area code. I usually ignore those, but I'd had a package delayed, so I figured it might be the delivery guy. The voice on the other end could have sliced enamel off teeth. "Mr. Malone, this is Karen Breslow, president of the High Ridge Commons Homeowners Association." I sighed internally. Of course, her name was Karen. "What can I do for you?" "First," she said, "I want to address your note. We've had your property under observation for some time, and it's clear you are a boundary outlier. You may think you're outside our system, but zoning maps say otherwise. We merely require access to ensure your drainage systems and facade don't impact the rest of the community." "Zoning maps don't say that," I replied. "Young man," she said, loading young man with more condescension than a Victorian governess. "You aren't familiar with how these things work. We expect you to cooperate fully. We have everything approved. I'm not part of your HOA. Don't come onto my land. Good night." And I hung up. It was the most satisfying hang-up I'd had all month. Still, something about her tone made my cybersecurity instincts twitch. So before I went to bed, I installed a tiny peephole camera in the front door with a wide-angle lens and linked it to my internal system, just in case. Not because I thought anything serious would happen, just the standard paranoid IT guy precaution, the same reason I password protect my toaster. For the next couple of days, the neighborhood seemed to retreat into its normal, sleepy rhythm. People walked dogs, kids biked near the cluster mailbox, and the wind carried nothing but pine and the faint hum of distant lawnmowers. But every now and then, I'd catch someone in a high-ridge polo shirt standing a bit too long at the edge of my driveway, not crossing the line, not doing anything actionable, just lingering, watching, cataloging, like wildlife researchers trying not to spook the creature they're stalking. By the 20th of the month, I stopped assuming it was coincidence. Something was coming on the 23rd, and those 2 hours they demanded weren't a request, they were a promise. My gut told me the HOA wasn't done with me. Far from it. The morning of the 23rd arrived with the kind of sharp, metallic chill that makes sunlight feel like a trick. I woke up earlier than usual, not because I expected trouble, but because some corner of my brain had filed today under high alert. I brewed coffee, checked my server logs, scanned the property cams, and tried to pretend that the HOA wouldn't be stupid enough to actually show up. They were. At precisely 10 o'clock in the morning, 10 o'clock exactly with the precision of a cult ritual, 2 men in neon orange safety vests strolled up to my gate. Both wore lanyards with laminated HOA badges that looked freshly printed, the kind of cheap lamination that traps air bubbles like guilty little secrets. They didn't knock, didn't ring, didn't even acknowledge the very human concept of hello. They just started photographing the hinges of my gate. A minute later, a black SUV rolled up the gravel path and parked sideways, like they were staging a tiny coup d'etat. Out stepped Karen Breslow herself, flanked by 3 more inspectors, one carrying what looked suspiciously like a portable generator, another with a handheld thermal scanner the size of a baby goat, and the third holding a drone case like he was about to conduct a military operation. The mood they radiated wasn't routine inspection, it was search warrant cosplay. They didn't bother approaching the front door. Instead, 2 of the men peeled off toward the side of the house, muttering about structural access points. One crouched beside my exterior power box and immediately began trying to unscrew it, narrating loudly to the others. Yep, non-compliant. Screws. Needs opening. I stepped outside with my phone already recording. Touch that panel and I swear you'll be explaining it to a judge in the next 48 hours. Karen swiveled toward me like a predator bird that had heard its prey sneeze. Mr. Malone, you were notified. We're here under the authority of High Ridge Commons to conduct a safety inspection. Please vacate the premises. I'm not part of High Ridge Commons, I said, and you're committing trespassing. Nonsense, she snapped. The community has approved this inspection. We protect our homes. You may not understand this now, but we uphold standards. The only standard you're upholding is felony stupidity. Her jaw twitched. The man with the drone set the case down and snapped it open without breaking eye contact with me. It was the slow, menacing kind of eye contact villains make in low-budget movies, right before doing something regrettable. I raised my phone. Stay exactly where you are. I'm calling the sheriff. We have paperwork, Karen announced triumphantly, waving a folder like it was a holy relic. This property has unresolved boundary issues. It falls under our purview. No, I said. It really doesn't. I dialed 911. Karen's eyes widened, then narrowed, as if recalibrating her strategy mid-glare. The first officer arrived 12 minutes later, a middle-aged deputy with the weary look of a man who had already dealt with too many neighborhood disputes for one career. His partner, younger and visibly inexperienced, followed a moment after. They took in the scene. 5 people in vests, scattered equipment, me holding a phone like a talisman against insanity. Karen pounced first. Officers, thank you for arriving so promptly. This homeowner is obstructing a mandated community inspection. We have documentation. He's refusing. He's belligerent. She handed over several sheets of paper. The younger officer examined them, frowning as if trying to decipher ancient runes. The older officer looked at me. Sir, your side? I handed him the folder containing my deed, the parcel maps, and the county zoning confirmation I'd gotten before purchasing the property. This land is not part of High Ridge Commons. They don't have jurisdiction. They've been told repeatedly not to step onto my property. Karen folded her arms. He's lying. Those maps are outdated. We have updated boundaries. She gestured sharply at one of her men. Show the officer. The man produced a printout. grainy, smudged, and suspiciously lacking any official seals. It looked like someone had traced over a Google Earth screenshot with a shaky hand. The younger officer compared it to my documents and glanced briefly at his partner. For a moment, there was hesitation, just enough that I realized Karen had probably trained for this exact moment, honing her ability to sound authoritative to people who didn't know better. "Ma'am," the older officer finally said, his voice steady, "your paperwork doesn't match county records." Karen stiffened. "It should." "It doesn't, and unless you have a court order, you need to leave this property." The younger officer chimed in more timidly. "Ma'am, the homeowner's documents are valid. You and your group need to step back." The look Karen gave them could have curdled concrete. "You're making a mistake," she hissed. "You don't understand what's at stake here. This community relies on oversight. This young man," she pointed at me as if accusing me of witchcraft, "is a potential source of systemic violations." "I'm a software engineer," I said, "not a biohazard." She ignored me completely, because of course, she did. The officers began escorting her group toward the gate. As they packed up their generator and drone with a distinct lack of enthusiasm, Karen leaned toward me just enough to speak under her breath. "We will resolve this, Mr. Malone. You will comply, whether you think you're part of us or not." I smiled. If that was meant to sound intimidating, it landed somewhere between middle school bully and threatening house cat. Her expression hardened like wet cement hitting rebar. By the time the black SUV rolled away, the only thing they'd left behind, aside from the lingering smell of entitlement, was a set of fresh scratches on my external power panel. And my cameras, despite covering most angles, had recorded something odd. During the commotion, one of their drones had hovered close enough to block a portion of the lens, almost like they'd planned it. The whole thing felt less like an inspection and more like the opening move in a much larger, much dumber war. And judging by the look Karen had given me before leaving, she had no intention of backing off. Not now. Not ever. The morning after the HOA invasion felt quieter than it should have. That eerie kind of quiet where even the wind sounds like it's holding its breath. I wasn't sure what I was expecting. Maybe an apology from Karen printed on fine letterhead with a coupon for neighborhood trauma counseling. What I got instead was a manila envelope in my mailbox with a government return address and the words "Action Required" stamped in red. I opened it right there at the curb. Inside, an official notice from the County Code Enforcement Division stating that a complaint had been filed against my property. Alleged violations included improper waste disposal, unsecured refuse storage, and visible signs of structural degradation. Attached were 4 photographs. The first showed a wide shot of my backyard, except the grass looked dead, the sky was overcast, and there were broken boards piled near the fence. I hadn't seen weather like that since February. The second photo showed the back of my house with what looked like sewage seeping from a drainage pipe, running dark and oily into the ground. The third was a pile of trash, cardboard boxes, shattered tiles, a rusted-out lawnmower, conveniently staged to look like it had been there for weeks. And the fourth was a close-up of my foundation wall with a deep crack running down the side and what appeared to be black mold at the base. I stared at them for a long minute, then looked at the house in front of me. Nothing matched. My foundation was intact, my lawn was green, and I hadn't seen black mold since I stopped renting apartments with character. This was a hit job, but it wasn't amateur. I marched inside, pulled up my home server, and started scanning the past 24 hours of footage. I watched every minute from every angle. No one had stepped onto the property. No garbage had appeared. No cracked wall. No mold. No pipe leak. My security logs showed no anomalies. But just after 3 in the morning, a heat signature hovered over the backyard for 7 minutes. A drone. I pulled the footage, slowed it frame by frame, and confirmed. A quadcopter, roughly commercial grade, hovered at around 15 feet. It wasn't just flying overhead. It was pausing, pivoting, angling, filming, or maybe projecting. I didn't know, but I'd seen enough to start digging. I scanned the complaint notice again. It had been filed online, submitted anonymously through a community standard submission portal, which was about as transparent as a brick wall. But the attached photos were downloadable, and that was all I needed. I saved the images, opened a metadata extraction tool, and got to work. Most public submission platforms scrub metadata by default, but this one had been rushed. Sloppy. Whoever uploaded these didn't strip the file info. The photos had geotags. Not of my house, Not even my block. The GPS coordinates pointed to a townhouse across the road. Lot number 18. I cross-referenced the parcel data with the county registry. Owner Karen Breslow. Bingo. There was more. The device used to upload the images was a Surface Pro registered to a user profile with the initials KB. The network signature showed a residential IP that matched the High Ridge HOA admin server, something I recognized from my prior passive scans of local Wi-Fi traffic. In short, Karen hadn't just taken fake photos of my house. She'd taken them, edited them, and submitted them through a backdoor system that her own HOA controlled, all from the comfort of her tidy HOA-approved living room. But that wasn't even the part that made my stomach turn. In the complaint text, buried in a footnote, was a citation. See revised zoning map. That wasn't a document I'd ever seen. And I'd studied the zoning registry like a man reading the fine print on a cursed contract. I launched a FOIA request through the county website, asking for copies of all recent zoning changes related to High Ridge Commons and the adjacent unincorporated plots, including mine. It would take a few days to process, but my gut told me something nasty was hiding behind that cryptic reference code. I leaned back in my chair, rubbed my eyes, and wondered how much free time a person had to have to fabricate fake sewage leaks and doctored zoning laws for the sake of imaginary authority. My answer came that evening. At around 6 o'clock, a knock landed on my front door. Not a package, not a neighbor with a casserole. A real knock. The kind that didn't belong in quiet neighborhoods unless someone died or someone was about to get sued. I opened it to find a man in his 70s leaning slightly on a wooden cane. Wire-rimmed glasses, plaid jacket, and a look that said he'd seen far too many HOAs for one lifetime. "You're Trevor Malone?" he asked. "Depends. You with the sewage department or the cult?" He chuckled. "Neither. Name's Frank. Frank Derrick. Used to own lot number 6, until Karen and her goon squad decided I didn't fit the aesthetic." I opened the door wider. He handed me a file folder, thick and worn at the edges. Inside, copies of correspondence between the original land developer and the county zoning board, maps from 20 years ago, meeting transcripts, and a document I'd never seen before, a memorandum of exclusion clearly stating that both his lot and mine were formally exempt from any future HOA jurisdiction due to drainage easements and boundary irregularities. "They buried this," he said. "Told me it was outdated, said I was misremembering. Next thing I know, there's a foreclosure action based on fabricated violations." I flipped through the pages like I was touching the Rosetta Stone. "I kept copies," he added. "Didn't think anyone would care. But then I saw your situation and figured maybe it was time someone fought back with the truth." I looked him in the eye. "You just became my favorite neighbor." And I meant it. By the next morning, I had scanned and archived every single page Frank had handed me, complete with OCR tags and a backup copy stored in an encrypted drive across 3 separate cloud services. Paranoia, Meet Protocol. I'd also brewed the strongest pot of coffee I'd made in weeks because I was staring down a paperwork war, and in America, that's where real battles are fought. Frank and I sat across from each other at my kitchen table, which had become a makeshift war room. I was explaining how I planned to weaponize a FOIA request when he leaned back in his chair and let out a slow, sardonic laugh. "You know," he said, "when I bought into High Ridge 20 years ago, I thought the HOA would help keep the lawns neat and the nosy teenagers out. Not once did I expect them to try and annex half the damn hill with a smile and a spreadsheet." "Annex is a good word for it," I said. "If Karen starts printing flags, I'm moving to Canada." My FOIA request had already gone through the confirmation stage. According to the county site, I'd get a response in 3 business days. But that didn't mean I was going to sit around twiddling my thumbs while Queen Karen reorganized the neighborhood like a risk board. First, I called my attorney. A week earlier, I'd retained a property rights lawyer out of Boulder named Joanna Green, recommended by one of my former clients who'd fought a corporate land grab. Joanna had the voice of a disillusioned public defender and the posture of someone who regularly stared down bulldozers in court. When I laid out the situation, fake inspection, drone surveillance, doctored complaint, altered zoning, there was a long pause on the line. "You have all this documented? Cameras, logs, metadata, witness, and now historical exclusion documents." "Good," she said. "Because if even half of what you're saying is true, you've got enough here for both a civil suit and a formal state complaint." Harassment, defamation, attempted fraud, unlawful surveillance. You want the whole 9 yards? I want to legally neuter this HOA so they can't breathe without a permit. Then start gathering affidavits. I'll draft cease and desist letters, and I want digital copies of every document you've got. We'll start with pressure, then we escalate. It was the first time I'd felt the legal system might actually favor me in this mess. Until then, it had felt like I was playing chess while the other side just tried to flip the board. Meanwhile, Frank had his own ideas. That same afternoon, he took me on a walking tour of the Gray Zone, a thin winding patch of land between High Ridge and my property that had once been planned as a greenbelt, then left undeveloped after budget cuts. See this line of old survey stakes, he said, pointing at a half-buried metal marker. They moved these 10 years ago. HOA hired a private contractor, paid under the table, said it was to clarify jurisdiction. I call bullshit. You think they shifted the markers to grab more land? I know they did, but proving it back then? Forget it. No one listened to an old man with a cane and a grudge. Well, I said, taking a picture of the stake and uploading it to my case folder. They're about to listen. That night, I launched a blog. Nothing flashy, just a basic WordPress site titled Outside the Lines, My Battle with High Ridge Commons. I posted photos of the fake inspection, the envelope from the county, the metadata breakdown from the complaint images. I blacked out addresses but left just enough detail to make the story real. Then I hit publish. Within hours, the post started picking up traction. HOA horror subreddits shared it. A property law forum linked it. Some dude on Twitter called me the Cyber Gandalf of suburban hell. Not the worst title I've had. The next morning, Joanna emailed me a PDF, a full cease and desist order addressed to Karen Breslow and the High Ridge Commons HOA. It laid out every violation we'd documented, demanded immediate cessation of all communications and encroachment, and warned of imminent legal action. I printed it on heavy stock paper and, with a smile, hand-delivered it to the HOA mailbox next to their creepy little community garden where the roses looked like they grew out of spite. That evening, things got stranger. My drone sensors pinged just after 1 in the morning. This time, I was ready. I activated my thermal cams and captured full footage, a drone hovering over the eastern side of the house, just above the greenbelt. But this one wasn't just filming. It was spraying something, tiny puffs of mist evenly distributed, drifting down onto the grass and fence line. Whatever it wasn't visible to the naked eye in daylight, but under UV the next morning, I found a fine residue like powdery chalk. I sent a sample to a lab in Denver just in case, and then I made a decision. If they were escalating, so was I. I filed 3 separate complaints. One with the Federal Aviation Administration for unauthorized drone operation within residential limits and night flying without clearance. One with the State Privacy Commission for surveillance harassment. And one with the Colorado Department of Regulatory Agencies regarding attempted boundary manipulation. By the end of the week, Karen was going to be buried under more paperwork than a tax evader in audit season. And I was just getting started. On Tuesday morning, the county zoning office emailed me a link to download the documents from my HOA request. I clicked it the second it hit my inbox, heart thudding like I was disarming a bomb. Inside the zip file were multiple PDFs. Most were what I expected: topographical maps, plat documents, meeting minutes from zoning board sessions over the past 2 decades. I scanned them quickly, looking for anything referencing my property line. Then I found it, HCZM, the file that had been referenced in the complaint against me. The cover page said, Boundary Clarification and Jurisdiction Extension, High Ridge Commons, March 2023. It had been approved by someone named Victor Hall, a deputy zoning administrator. There was no record of any vote, no resident notifications, no public hearing minutes. The change had quietly redrawn the line, suddenly including my property and 2 others into the HOA's jurisdiction, just like that. With the stroke of a digital pen, land that had been legally outside the HOA for 2 decades was now labeled subject to collective maintenance and oversight. It was bureaucratic identity theft. I searched Victor Hall's name and found something immediately suspicious. He wasn't just a zoning official, he was a former associate at a law firm in Denver called Breslow, Hanover and Keene. That's right, Breslow. Karen's maiden name wasn't exactly classified information. She'd used it on the HOA's tax filings. The connection was too obvious to ignore. I cross-referenced public employment records and found that Victor had started at the zoning department just 11 months ago, 6 months before the boundary extension had been quietly slipped into the books. I picked up the phone and called Joanna. "There it is," I said. Direct line between her and the guy who redrew the maps. Joanna let out a low whistle. "You just found the missing bullet in a smoking gun." We drafted an addendum to the case, naming Victor Hall as a co-conspirator in a coordinated attempt to falsify zoning boundaries for personal and organizational gain. The term malicious administrative fraud appeared more than once. Meanwhile, Frank came by later that day with another surprise, his own FOIA results. The man had apparently filed his own request the same day I did, because as he put it, "I don't like to show up empty-handed when the walls start moving." Among his documents was a zoning commission memo from 2 years ago detailing a rejected proposal by the High Ridge Commons HOA to expand its boundaries into surrounding lots. The reasoning for the rejection was crystal clear: insufficient resident consensus and historical exclusion of the parcels in question. Karen had tried this before and failed. Only this time she'd done it quietly. No vote, no hearing. Just Victor Hall and a modified PDF slipped past oversight like a virus in an outdated firewall. We took both sets of documents and added them to the court motion. Joanna revised the filing to include intentional misrepresentation, unauthorized administrative manipulation, and attempted subjugation of private property. Somewhere in a corner of my mind, I registered how insane that phrase sounded. Like we were fighting a miniature dictatorship. But when your opponent redraws maps to steal land, what else do you call it? The next morning, a sheriff's cruiser idled outside my gate for 30 minutes. No lights, no knock, just sitting there. I stepped out onto the porch with my coffee, gave them a nod. They didn't respond. Eventually, they drove off. Was it intimidation, surveillance, a lazy lunch break? No idea, but it didn't feel like nothing. Later that night, my blog received a sudden spike in traffic from a local news affiliate's IP address. An hour after that, I got an email from a reporter at Channel 9 Investigates. She asked for an interview. I said yes. The interview took place the next day, right on my front porch, with the foothills behind me, and Frank sitting off camera with a beer like he was watching a reality show he already knew the ending to. I showed them the documents, the old maps, the drone footage. I kept my tone calm, matter of fact. No paranoia, just facts. That night, the story aired under the headline, "Homeowner Battles HOA Over Secret Zoning Change. They Tried to Take My Land with a Pen." It went viral. I knew without a shred of doubt that Karen had seen it. I also knew she wouldn't take it lying down. And sure enough, the next morning, I found a brand new letter in my mailbox from her personal attorney. It was a cease and desist accusing me of defamation, libel, interference with community interests, and online harassment of a civic volunteer. Joanna laughed for a solid 30 seconds when I sent it to her. "We're going to file an anti-slap motion," she said, "and when we win, they'll pay for it." By then, I'd memorized the HOA's favorite tactic: act first, fabricate later. But now I had what they didn't expect: a stack of old documents, a pissed-off senior citizen with nothing to lose, and a digital paper trail so tight you could strangle a bear with it. Let them come. The line had been drawn. And this time, it wasn't moving. The courtroom looked like every courtroom I'd ever seen on TV, only smaller and infinitely more tense. Pale walls, wooden fixtures, an uncomfortable number of flags, and Karen Breslow, seated at the far table, dressed in the kind of beige suit that screamed control, staring at me like she was mentally rearranging my obituary. To her right sat her attorney, a wiry man with a permanent sneer and a briefcase that probably cost more than my front porch. To my left sat Joanna Green, flipping through her stack of color-coded evidence with the casual confidence of someone who could gut a lie in 5 seconds flat. Frank Derrick was already in the front row behind us, arms folded, calm as a monk at a bar fight. The judge, a middle-aged woman with sharp eyes and an even sharper tongue, called the session to order. What followed wasn't a trial yet. Not technically. This was the pre-hearing on my civil complaint against Karen and the HOA for harassment, defamation, falsification of records, and unlawful attempts to assert authority over private property. Karen's attorney opened with something between a speech and a sanctimonious TED Talk about community values and the need for unified neighborhood standards. He used the word harmony 5 times in under 2 minutes. I nearly vomited in my mouth. Then Joanna stood. She didn't shout. She didn't posture. She simply introduced Exhibit A, the original development maps showing my parcel and Frank's before me, listed explicitly as exempt from HOA jurisdiction. Exhibit B, the FOIA documents showing the 2023 zoning map that magically included my land without a hearing, without notice, and signed by a zoning official with a professional history tied directly to Karen. Exhibit C, the internal correspondence between Karen and the official Victor Hall, specifically an email chain in which Karen described the change as a soft adjustment and instructed Hall to handle it with discretion to avoid community panic. The judge's eyebrow twitched at that one. Karen's lawyer objected on the basis of unauthorized data collection. Joanna produced the FOIA receipts. Objection overruled, and then came the star moment. Frank Derrick took the stand. The room shifted. Frank walked like a man who'd had knees replaced twice and patience replaced even earlier, but his voice was steady. He told the court how Karen had engineered a bogus vote to expel him from High Ridge years ago, citing aesthetic violations after he refused to repaint his garage door. He presented his original exclusion documents, signed and stamped in 1999. He described how the HOA had moved the property stakes behind his lot under cover of a landscaping contract. How he'd reported it. How the complaint had mysteriously vanished. They made me feel like I was crazy, he said, voice low. But I kept copies, because I knew one day it'd happen again to someone who could fight back. Karen stared at him like he was a ghost from a chapter she'd tried to rip out. Then Joanna introduced Exhibit D, the drone metadata, the geolocation tags, the upload logs tied to Karen's residence, the laptop's device ID, the IP address used for the fake complaint to the county. All of it. The courtroom went still. Karen's lawyer tried to object again. Pure speculation, unsupported digital forensics. But Joanna had already anticipated it. She handed over a certified affidavit from a third-party IT firm confirming the integrity of the data. Chain of custody intact. Credentials verified. Karen, for her part, didn't flinch. She sat rigid, hands folded, mouth sealed. Then Joanna hit the gas. She played the local news segment that had aired the week prior, showing my interview, the documents, the drone footage, and then, to top it off, submitted Karen's retaliatory cease and desist letter against me as evidence of an attempt to silence a whistleblower. By that point, the judge had taken off her reading glasses and was looking over them like a parent about to cancel Christmas. The final nail came when Victor Hall, subpoenaed that same week, was called to testify. He looked nervous, sweaty, like a man caught forging signatures on a sinking ship. Under questioning, he admitted to approving the boundary change without a public hearing, claimed he believed Karen's summary of the situation and didn't question it. And did you know that her property was directly adjacent to the area she requested jurisdiction over? Joanna asked. Yes, he said, but I didn't think it was relevant. That was a mistake. The judge recessed after 3 hours. When we returned the next day, she issued her ruling on the preliminary hearing. Karen Breslow and the HOA had no legal authority over my property, or Frank's, or any of the parcels affected by the altered map. Furthermore, she found sufficient evidence of intentional misrepresentation and coordinated harassment to proceed to a full civil trial. Karen's mouth tightened like she'd swallowed a lemon wedge soaked in formaldehyde. The HOA's operations were ordered suspended pending further review, and for the first time since this whole war began, I saw something on Karen's face that looked suspiciously like fear. I didn't celebrate, not yet, because I knew her. And Karen Breslow didn't know how to lose. Not quietly, not legally. 3 nights after the preliminary hearing, someone cut the power to my house. Not the grid, not a blown fuse, a surgical disconnection. 1 minute, I was editing video footage of Victor Hall stammering his way through perjury, and the next, total darkness. My emergency battery backups kicked in, but the fiber line was dead, the cameras stopped syncing, and the house went from secure bunker to blind fortress in under 10 seconds. And just like that, I knew. Karen wasn't finished. I checked the outdoor cameras manually, thank God for independent solar feeds. At the far end of the property near the eastern tree line, I spotted movement. 2 figures in dark clothing were kneeling near the utility junction box. One of them had wire cutters, the other a drill. That wasn't sabotage, that was forced entry preparation. I didn't hesitate. I grabbed my flashlight, my phone, and the air horn I kept by the front door, originally meant for bears, now apparently repurposed for HOA ninjas. I bolted out the back, circling toward the intruders in a wide arc. The second I let the air horn rip, they ran. Not back toward High Ridge Commons. Downhill, toward the old service road that hadn't been used in years. I couldn't catch them, but my motion cams caught everything. And when I reviewed the footage, I recognized one of them. It was the guy who operated the drone during the inspection. Same black gloves, same gait, same smug posture that said he thought rules were for other people. I forwarded the footage to Joanna and called the sheriff's department. This time, they didn't hesitate. A patrol arrived in under 20 minutes. They took a statement, reviewed the footage, and finally opened an investigation into criminal trespassing and property sabotage. The lead deputy pulled me aside. "Between you and me," he said, "this whole HOA is on thin ice. We've had 3 other complaints this year, all about the same thing. False notices, drone harassment, threats of inspection. You're just the first one to fight back this hard." It wasn't comforting. Not really. Because when cornered, people like Karen didn't retreat. They detonated. The next day, my mailbox exploded. Not literally, but metaphorically, it vomited up a stack of paperwork that could have killed a toddler if dropped from a high shelf. It included a notice of emergency community hearing to remove dangerous elements from High Ridge's vicinity, a petition falsified signed by residents demanding I be formally reviewed for environmental violations, a claim that my property's fence line extended into HOA land by 13 inches, and a threat of legal action unless I corrected the encroachment. Karen had turned the dial past desperation and straight into lunacy. That night, Frank came over carrying a bottle of whiskey and a metal lockbox. "Time to pull the kill switch," he said. The box contained meeting transcripts from the HOA's first charter sessions, handwritten notes from the original founder, who had explicitly named the exclusion parcels, including mine, as buffer zones against expansion. Even better? A copy of an old civil agreement between the founding HOA board and the original developer, legally barring any future jurisdictional absorption without unanimous approval from all surrounding property owners. And there were signatures, lots of them, including Karen's own husband, back when he was still alive and part of the original board. Frank looked me in the eye. "She knows this exists. She thought I burned it." Joanna nearly cried when I scanned it and sent it over. "That's it," she said. "That's the sledgehammer. That agreement trumps every zoning map, every boundary redraft, every HOA document signed after 2005. This ends it." We filed for an emergency injunction the next morning. But while the paperwork churned through the legal machine, Karen escalated again. This time, it wasn't sneaky. At 3 p.m. on a Saturday, she marched up my driveway with 5 HOA board members in tow. One of them filmed with a phone. Another carried a megaphone. A third had a rolled-up blueprint like it was a weapon. Karen held a manila folder, thick and triumphant. "We are initiating community correction protocols," she declared, reading from the papers. "You are now officially in violation of Section 4, Subsection 3 of the Structural Harmony Mandate. You have 72 hours to comply." I stepped outside calmly, phone already recording. "You step 1 inch onto this porch," I said, "and you'll be explaining it to a judge, a sheriff, and possibly a forensic accountant." She didn't blink, just waved her folder like it could part seas. Then the best thing happened. The news van rolled up. The same reporter from Channel 9 had been following my blog. I'd tipped her off 30 minutes earlier when the HOA goons started assembling like they were about to perform a suburban exorcism. Her cameraman jumped out and caught the whole spectacle. Karen's smug expression wavered the moment she saw the microphone. "This is private community business," she snapped. "On land you don't control?" the reporter asked. "That's a bold move." I turned to the camera. As you can see, the HOA continues to assert illegal jurisdiction despite court rulings and direct warnings from county officials. Karen tried to speak again, but her own board members were already backing away. One of them muttered something about not being dragged into jail time. She glared at them. "Cowards." Then to me, "You may have won a few hearings, but you don't belong here. You'll never be part of this community." I smiled. "That's the point." She turned and left, the camera trailing her like a shadow she couldn't shake. That night, Channel 9 aired a follow-up segment. My blog crashed from the traffic spike. Someone created a subreddit called R. Karen the Zoner, and Joanna called with 2 words. "Injunction granted." Karen Breslow had 48 hours to cease all HOA activity. After that, any further action would carry personal liability and criminal consequences. It wasn't over. But the tide had turned. The courthouse was standing room only. Neighbors packed the benches like spectators at a championship game, their faces a mixture of nervous tension and thinly veiled curiosity. A few wore HOA lapel pins. Most didn't. At least 3 people nodded at me when I entered, like I'd become some reluctant folk hero in hiking boots. Karen arrived 15 minutes late, alone. Her attorney had filed a motion to withdraw from the case the day before, citing irreconcilable differences and client non-compliance, which is lawyer speak, for she went full kamikaze. She carried her own binder, her own notes, and none of the smug self-assurance she wore like armor during the earlier hearings. The trial itself didn't last long. Joanna came in with ironclad documentation, 3 sworn affidavits, including Frank's, the original developer's grandson via video call, and an HOA board member who had finally flipped after realizing Karen had forged his signature on at least 2 resolutions. Karen didn't argue the facts. She tried instead to monologue. I was protecting the standard of living, she told the judge. In the absence of order, communities decay. People like him, she pointed at me, don't understand the value of structure, of oversight. The judge mercifully cut her off. In her ruling, she didn't just affirm that my property and the others were exempt. She found Karen personally liable for fraud, harassment, and abuse of civic authority. Damages: $520,000 in fines and restitution, 6 years probation. The HOA, now deemed functionally compromised, was ordered to dissolve under court supervision. Karen didn't look at me as they read the judgment. But she didn't look away either, just stared ahead like someone watching a kingdom burn. Afterwards, I stood at my property line, Frank beside me, watching the HOA signs get pulled down by court order. The last drone abandoned in the HOA office sat boxed and impounded. I bought the adjacent lot 2 months later. Now it's a private tech retreat. Fire pit, fiber internet, no bylaws, no inspections. The sign at the gate says, no HOAs, no drones, no Karens, and I've never slept better.